Hello, this video begins our probability unit and it is on simple events. So probability is the likelihood of something happening. That's an important word that you want to have written down and circled and highlighted. Probability is always between 0 and 1 or 0% and 100% because we can always convert decimals or fractions into percent. So if you look at this chart here, as you probably already know, but if we have a 0% chance of something happening, it's impossible. And a 100% chance of something happening means that it is certain, like it is for sure going to happen. And then we have unlikely, as likely to happen as not, so kind of right in the middle, and then likely. So it's important to understand where probabilities fall, basically based on percentages from 0 to 100%. And then you can also see, like here, it can be written as a fraction, decimal, percent, fraction, decimal, percent. A simple event is one experiment happening at a time with one outcome. So some examples of common simple events: rolling a die, flipping a coin, picking a card out of a deck, picking an item out of a bag, and many, many more things. But it's one thing happening. So one experiment, one thing, like rolling a die once would be the simple event. Picking a card out of a deck one time would be the simple event. And then whatever that outcome is. Probability is if all outcomes are equally likely, so everything has to be equally likely. The probability of a simple event is a ratio that compares the number of favorable outcomes to the number of possible outcomes. So please circle this or write this down. So we would write probability as a fraction, and when it says number of favorable outcomes, so that means what we're looking for. That's what we want to happen. And the number of possible outcomes is how many possible things or outcomes or situations could happen. So what is the probability of rolling an even number on a number cube, which is the same as a die, marked with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on its faces? So probability of rolling an even number. So on a die, we know that there's 2, 4, 6, which tells me that there's 3 favorable outcomes because we're looking for an even number. And then we know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's six possible outcomes. So we would write it as the probability of an even number, equals 3/6, and then we always simplify that. So that would be 1/2. So the probability is 1/2 or 50%, which remember we can just do 1 divided by 2 and then times it by 100 or move the decimal over 2 to the right. If you roll a die one time, what is the probability of rolling a 5 or a 6? So we would write so the way I would say this right here that I'm underlining, I would say probability of a 5 or a 6. So that's how we write it. And then remember the numerator is the number of favorable outcomes. So we want a 5 or a 6, which tells me that there's 2 favorable outcomes. And then the bottom is the number of possible outcomes. So again, there's 6 because there's 6 total sides on the die. We simplify it. 2/6 is the same as 1/3. And then we're going to write that. We're going to write it in all forms. So 1/3 is also 0.3 repeating, which is 0.33333. So then that would also be 33.3. If we round it to the 10th, 33.3%. So we have a 33.3% of rolling a die and getting a 5 or a 6. If you flip a coin, what is the probability of flipping heads? So probability of heads, well, there's 2 outcomes, either heads or tails. So that's going to be my bottom. And then heads is just one of them. So 1/2, which is 50%. So we have a 50% chance of flipping heads. If you pick a card out of a deck, find the following probabilities. So probability of it being red. So if you are not sure, there is 52 total cards in a deck. Half are black, half are red, and then there's 4 suits, and that's divided between all of them. So probability of red There's 52 cards, so 52 is going to be on the bottom. Half of them are red, so half of 52 is 26. 26 50-seconds, we would say, is the same as 1/2, which is 50%. Which, when I said there was 52 total, half are red, half are black, then we kind of know that there's a 50% probability of getting a red card. Probability of picking a 7. So we still have 52 cards in the deck that we're picking from. There's 1 7 per suit, and remember I said there's 4 suits, so that means there's 4 7s. So 4 50-seconds, and then I can simplify that. I can divide them both by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. 52 divided by 4 is 13. And then I could leave it like that. And if I put in my calculator 1 divided by 13, I get 0.077. I'm going to round to the nearest thousandth. And then that would, remember we go 2 to the right, so then it would be 7.7% chance or probability of getting a 7. And then the probability of getting the 9 of hearts, there's only 1 9 of hearts in the whole deck. So just be 1 out of 52 because there's 52 cards. And then I can do 1 divided by 52, which is 0.019. So that would be a 1.9 percent probability of getting the 9 of hearts. The table shows the number of brass instrument players in the New York Philharmonic. Suppose one brass instrument is randomly selected to be a featured performer. Find the probability of each event. So probability of picking a horn or tuba. So here's the horn, and here's the tuba. So we know that either a horn or a tuba, there's 7, right? Because we would do 6 plus 1. So probability of horn or tuba is going to be 7. And then remember the bottom is the possible outcomes. So I would add all these up. 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 3 is 13, plus 1 is 14. So 7/14, which I know is the same as 1/2. So the probability of picking a horn or a tuba is 50%. Probability of picking a flute. There are 0 flutes, so it would be 0 out of 14, which would be 0%. There's 0% probability that a flute would be chosen. Obviously making sense because there are no flute players in the Philharmonic. Another word that I want you to understand and make sure you have is complementary events. Complementary events is when you have 2 simple events and the sum of probabilities is 100%. So let's look at this and then we'll talk about that in a minute. So if we look at this spinner right here, first of all, I'm going to count how many spots there are in the spinner. So I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different equal spots on the spinner. So the probability of spinning a purple, there's 1 purple spot and there's 5, so it's going to be 1/5. And then 1/5 is the same as 0.2, which is 20%. So the probability of spinning a purple is 1/5 or 20%. And then we look at the probability of not purple. So I can go in and I can count and I can see that there's 4 spaces that are not purple. But if I just look right here, and I know that if the probability of purple is 1/5, then the probability of not purple has to be 4/5 because it's either purple or it's not purple. So then that would be 0.8, which is 80%. And then you could see here that the probability of purple is 20%, not purple is 80%. 20 plus 80% equals 100%. The probability of red or orange is there's 2 spaces with red or orange. So it's going to be, I'm going to write this over here, 2/5, which is going to be 0.4, which is 40%. So then the probability of not red or orange, I don't even have to look back at the spinner. I just know if the probability of red or orange is 40%, then the probability of not red or orange is going to be 60% because remember they have to equal 100%. So complementary events is basically like the probability of it not happening, and then they add up to 100%. Belinda Johnson says there is a 25% chance it is going to snow today. What is the complementary event? And then find its probability. So Belinda says that the probability of snow is 25%. So the complementary event would be the probability of not snow. And if the probability is 25%, the probability of not snow is 75% because it's either going to snow or not snow. It might do other things, but we're just talking about snowing or not snowing. I want you to pause the video and do these problems on your own and then come back and check your work. Okay, so if we're looking at probability of a beagle, I can see that there's 3 beagles, so 3 out of 30 because there's total 30 dogs. Simplified to 1/10 would be 10%. Probability of a lab or a poodle, there's 12 and 8, so that makes 20, so 20/30 gives me 2/3, which gets me 66.7%. Not a retriever, so what I did was I just took 30 minus 7 and I got 23/30, and then that's 76.7%. Probability of a boy or a girl, well, it's either a boy or a girl. So all of them are either a boy or a girl, which gets me 1, which is 100%. And then what is the probability of the spinner landing on a number less than 3? So right here I wrote out my favorable outcomes, which could be 0, 1, or 2, which would be 3 out of 8 total spots. And then I divided that, got 0.375, and then that got me to 37.5%. And then what is an outcome of spinning at one time that has a probability of 50%? Lots of different options here, but you could have said probability of 4 or greater, probability of being an odd number, less than 4, prime number, and so forth. That's all I have. Have a great day.